when I see a grown man reading a literary novel on an airplane, I have to restrain myself from hugging him or saying, "Sir, you realize you're an endangered species, God bless you." And sometimes, every once in a while, you're in an airport, you're waiting for a bag at the carousel, there's a guy circling the carousel, and he recognizes you, and you get your hopes up. He's going to come and say, "You're my favorite writer." No. No, it's not what it's about. The guy comes up and says, Are you John Irving?" "Yes." I say a little tentatively. He said, "You're my mother's favorite writer." "You're my wife's favorite writer. You're my daughter's favorite writer." Oh, thanks a lot. Okay, fine.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Yvonne Hunter, and I'm the head of programming here at the Appel Salon at the Toronto Public Library. Yay! It is my great pleasure this evening to welcome back to the Appel Salon stage the internationally best-selling author of A Prayer for Owen Meany and The Cider House Rules. John Irving joins us with his new novel, Avenue of Mysteries, in conversation with freelance journalist Tina Srabotniak. Tonight, try and imagine, if you will, the thoughts of the person sitting beside you, who is perhaps a friend or a loved one. Imagine you knew all the worst things that had happened to them, and try to imagine what you would do if you knew what the future had in store for them. In Avenue of Mysteries, Juan Diego, a 14-year-old Mexican boy, has a sister named Lupe who thinks she sees what's coming, her own future and her brother's. What might a 13-year-old girl be driven to do if she thought she could change the future? In this absorbing novel of fate and memory, John Irving returns to themes that have established him as one of the most admired and beloved authors in the world. As an older man, Juan Diego takes us on a journey to the Philippines. Traveling with him are his dreams and memories, and a cast of precocious children, lions, circus performers, dwarves, Jesuit priests, strong women, and transgender people, all joining the journey, says the Toronto Star, almost as if they've stepped out of Mr. Irving's other novels. Joining him on stage tonight is freelance journalist and former Appel Salon host Tina Srabotniak. Tina, as many of you know, is the former host of Midday and TVO's Imprint. She is an avid reader and a juror for the City of Toronto Book Awards. And now, please give a warm welcome. Give me a warm welcome to John Irving and Tina Srabotniak.
Hope you're all well. I'm very thrilled you're all here because Justin Bieber is playing downtown. And on the one hand, Justin Bieber, on the other hand, John Irving. We know who they're going for.
Is he 40 yet?
Oh, honey, he's 12. He's 20. I think he is 20 now. So this book, like all your others, has such scope, such imagination. And I think you've been thinking about it for a long time, right? It started life as a screenplay. 25 years? I mean, like longer than usual? It started life as a screenplay, right? And then it decided to become a book?
Yes, that's the short version. I don't. I imagine that I plan everything very carefully, but sometimes there's an element of over-planning that I lose a little control of. For 18 of the more than 25 years that I've lived with half of this story, it was only a movie. It was only an original screenplay. Those were my intentions for the story. I went at the request of my old friend, Mary Ellen Mark, the photographer who died last May, and her husband, the British-born filmmaker Martin Bell. I went with Martin and Mary Ellen to India in the winter of 1990. But before we made that trip, I had already written a couple of drafts of a screenplay then called Escaping Maharashtra. This idea was completely Mary Ellen. And I was compelled to go to India with Martin and Mary Ellen because of Mary Ellen's photographs of child performers in Indian circuses, children acrobats. Martin and Mary Ellen knew me very well, both as a writer and as a father. They knew that the subject of something happening to a child was an obsession of mine, both in my writing and in my life. And they thought this situation would interest me. They were right. The circumstances of the children who become many of the performers, especially the acrobats in high wire acts in the Indian circus, are children. And the circumstances they come from, well, you could make the case that their chances in the circus are arguably better than what might happen to them if the circus never took them. But the circus isn't a good bet either, not because they aren't trained, or for the most part, pretty well looked after, but because in most of the circuses in India, there is no safety net. As any acrobat will tell you, every acrobat has fallen. The practice tents were about 12 feet tall. You could survive that fall. The main circus tents were 80 feet tall. Nobody survived that fall. So it is a part of my particular perversity that I like stories where characters are painted into a corner. In other words, the odds aren't very good if you don't go. The odds aren't very good if you do. And those are the odds for those children, and that's why I went.
You mentioned that your friend knew you would be interested in this, and children at risk is certainly a theme of yours that comes up in many of your books. Have you analyzed why you're so interested in that? Is it just being a dad and the kind of low-grade anxiety we all have about our children?
I think for an imaginative writer, for a writer of fiction, it's both a waste of time and probably counterproductive to analyze the things that obsess you.
Okay, well, that was a short answer.
In other words, Tina, I don't know that an analysis of the recurrent nightmares you have will make them go away. You don't pick them. They choose you. You don't have a choice in what wakes you up at 4 o'clock in the morning and doesn't allow you to go back to sleep. You didn't choose what that is. It finds you. It comes back. And, you know, my feeling as a writer is if I can use it, I will. And I have. I certainly am drawn as a writer to worst case scenarios. I'm drawn as a reader to worst case scenarios too, which is why I love best and foremost those 19th century novels that made me want to be a writer in the first place. You have to be an idiot to read even a quarter of Moby Dick and think the Pequod is sailing safely home. It's a bad ship to have shipped out on. Nobody doubts it. Nobody doubts it. Well, Martin and I couldn't get the movie made in India, largely for reasons to do with the Indian government, but those reasons don't matter. We needed another location. And once again, Mary Ellen knew more about that than we did. She had also found children performing in Mexican circuses. The circuses themselves were a little more rudimentary for what I was interested in. Rudimentary isn't bad. But they had in common with the circuses of India that, once again, the principal performers who are at risk are children. And once again, in most of these circuses, there is no net. The acts themselves are not as sophisticated as the Indian circus, which is very sophisticated. But the degree of sophistication was not important to me. And as you probably noticed, the act I was most interested in, it was easy to create a fictional reason for my bringing it from India. Ignacio, the lion tamer, goes to India and borrows the trick himself. That was easy. The relocation to Mexico was a good idea. The Jesuits, which were vital to the story, the Jesuits have always worked better in Mexico than they ever worked in India. Mm-hmm. The Catholic Church has a far better hold on Mexico than it has on India. All of those things fell into our hands. And most especially, something we didn't go looking for, something that fell into our hands. Over the many years that Martin and I and Mary Ellen, when she was alive, went to Mexico, what really fell into our hands is the circumstances of the children I wanted to take to the circus in the Mexican version of the story. They're dump kids.
Explain what that is.
Niños de la basura, they call them in Mexico, literally children of the rubbish. They're also called los pepenadores, scavengers. They pick and sort the stuff in the dump. The dumps were a little different in 1970 when this story begins, in that you could burn everything or anything that would burn. I mean everything. And that you can burn anything in the dump, as you know, is very important to this story. Mm-hmm. Both the screenplay, when it was only a screenplay, and the novel. The burning was important. Nowadays, there are more restrictions regarding what you can burn in the Mexican dumps, in the Oaxaca, basurero especially. Basurero is dump in Spanish, in Mexican Spanish especially. We got lucky by the contact with the dump. The children wear these thick rubber boots, for the most part to protect them from being pricked by all the discarded needles and syringes in the dump. There are dogs everywhere. There are vultures overhead. And the choice between the dump or the circus was precisely the choice I was looking for, with the Jesuit orphanage thrown in. That was the essential sort of threesome of ingredients. And in all the trips to Mexico, beginning in 97, 2008, 2009, 2011, 2014, visits to circuses, the dump became the primary landscape in the Mexican version of this screenplay.
So Juan Diego, who's the 14-year-old boy, the dump kid that we meet when he's 14, he then goes on, he leaves Mexico eventually and comes to the United States and becomes quite a famous writer. And we meet him in part of the book. He's on a trip to the Philippines, but he's often falling asleep, and he's a man who seems to live much more in his memory than he does in his real life. Every time he falls asleep, he goes back into dreaming about his life, and it seems to be where he really is alive, even though he's quite a well-known, famous writer in his adult life. Why is he so rooted in the past?
Well, Juan Diego wouldn't be the first of my characters who has a formative, life-changing, even inexplicable trauma happened to him at that threshold age, at or around puberty. Think of how many characters in my novels have had something happen to them at that age, which not only is formative of the adult they will become, but as they grow older, to a large extent, emotionally and psychologically, eclipses everything else in their life, their adult life especially, that has ever happened to them. This, as you know, as a novel, is a story told on parallel tracks. There is a constant back and forth between Juan Diego's life as a 14-year-old in Mexico and 40 years later, when he's 54, this trip he is taking to the Philippines. Well, I like the architecture. The architecture of a novel is something I have to see very clearly before I begin. It's the architecture of the story that probably means the most to me. And in addition to one day in Mexico, seeing how this screenplay could be a novel, in addition to seeing that, at the moment I saw how it could be a novel and what would make it a novel, I also saw how I would tell it. I also saw that back and forth architecture, which I like very much, and which owes itself a debt to the way many movies are constructed. It's the novel is not so much edited as it is cut like a film. And I wrote most of the part of the story in the Philippines consecutively. I'd already written the story of Juan Diego's childhood and early adolescence consecutively as a screenplay, and rewrote it consecutively from the screenplay to fiction, so that I could see these stories side by side. And the way you do in an editing room when you're cutting a film, I could see that this would be a good trigger to take us to that. This moment in the Philippines would set up that moment in Oaxaca. This scene in Mexico City would bring us back to Manila. And I could, so even the way I laid out, there were 2 manuscripts. And even the way I laid out the manuscripts owes some debt to the long ago origins of this story as a film.
2 of my favorite characters, and I think everybody's who's read it, I'm sure, are the mother-daughter team. So this is a mother-daughter team that guides Juan Diego on his trip to the Philippines. And they're a very odd duo. In fact, they may not be entirely real, but they take hold of Juan Diego in every conceivable way. There's a lot of acrobatic sex that goes on with the mother and daughter. So tell me a bit about these characters and how what they're doing in the book.
I'll tell you a bit about them, but I'm going to try to be careful not to say too much about them, because I think the direction those women take is worth saving for readers who haven't gotten there yet. So it's always hard to speak to an audience when I can't presume and don't know where you are in the novel if you've already begun, or I don't want to give the wrong things away. At the same time, because I'm so willfully predetermined about the way I write a novel, all of my novels are ending driven, I give a lot away. I give a lot away when I'm writing a novel. There's a lot I want you to imagine or anticipate that's going to happen, and for the most part I want you to anticipate correctly. I want you to be guessing what's going to happen, and for the most part I want you to be right, for the most part. There's always something I'd like you to be wrong about, and that I try to retain. Two things happened to me in a car driving back from a terrifying circus about a couple of hours drive outside Mexico City with Martin Bell, my director. And it was that moment when I thought, you know, I'll tell you what would make this a novel. I said, there's a moment when Juan Diego is 14 in Mexico, and he and Lupe, his 13-year-old sister, have met this charming but lost draft dodger. And the boy, this being an older boy, a boy in his 20s, has a terribly romantic and compelling effect on these two younger children, a 13-year-old and 14-year-old. Lupe imagines for a while that she might be in love with him. Juan Diego is enamored in other ways. He seems heroic, this kid. To most of us reading the book, he will seem exactly to you what he is, doomed. He's a runaway kid, he's a lost kid, he's in a lot of trouble. He doesn't look like a survivor from the moment you lay eyes on him. But Juan Diego makes this kid a promise in a bathtub of all places. He promises that if something happens to the draft dodger, he, Juan Diego, will go to the Philippines and pay the draft dodger's respect to his father, one of the many American soldiers who was killed in World War II and who's buried in the vast American cemetery and memorial in Manila. And I said to Martin in the car, in the dark, coming back from a terrifying circus where there were no bars for the lions. Truly. The lions were in the ring.
Oh.
No bars.
Oh.
The hell with a safety net. There were no bars for the lions. That'll get your attention. So we were talking in the car, trying to forget about the lions, and I said, you know, what makes this a novel is if we meet this guy 40 years later and he's on his way to make good on the impossible, unrealistic promise he makes to this lost soul when he was 14. A promise he can't really possibly keep, and there's no good reason for even keeping it. But you do things when you're 14 that you don't do at other times in your life, etc. Well, that was one thing. I haven't forgotten about those two women. You think I have.
Yes, he just wanted to throw me off the scent. That's right.
No, I just wanted you to forget about them for a while. I haven't forgot about them.
No, you never forget about anything.
There's another reason. I like the idea of seeing this laid out as a novel instead of only a film, as I call it. And that was, there's a moment when Juan Diego is crippled as a child. A garbage truck runs over his foot, and the old dump boss who loves him, brings the boy to the most imposing statue of the Virgin Mary in the Jesuit temple, hoping for a miracle, and lays the boy at the feet of the Virgin. And there's a moment when Juan Diego feels the pain slip away. Suddenly it abates. He's no longer in pain. And at that moment, he sees in one of the early rows, one of the early pews of the temple, he sees two women, all in black, as if they're mourning someone. And he thinks, just briefly, maybe I'm dying and they're mourning me. But then, as soon as he has this thought, the pain is back, full force. He's screaming again, and the next time he looks, those two have disappeared. And he thinks, I'm okay. I'm not gonna die. I can feel it. They're gone, whoever they were. Well, in addition to the promise made to the draft dodger, I thought, no, if he goes to the Philippines 40 years later, those two come with him. Right? Those two are his attendants, right? So that was another dimension. Think of it this way. Everybody knows the process, or at least a little about the process of what happens when you adapt a novel, a long novel especially, into, let's say, a feature-length film. That adaptation, you lose a lot of characters, you lose a lot of storylines. It has to come down. It has to come down, 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 down. And from the point of view of someone who writes screenplays and writes novels, right? I personally don't like those movies in which so much time passes that you need to change actors for your principal characters 2 or 3 times.
Right.
I don't believe those movies. They don't work for me. Sorry if you like them, but I don't want to write one. I don't want to be a part of it, which is a principal reason why I don't usually say yes when someone asks me if I want to adapt one of my novels to a film. Most often I say, no, not interested, because I do not see how to separate it from the passage of time, and I don't like those movies where 3 or 4 different actors have to play an important character in the story. Novels do the passage of time better than any other way of telling a story. A 5-year-old boy, a 40-year-old man, a 75-year-old man, it's the same character. You don't forget the 5-year-old when you're with the 75-year-old man. Not true on the stage, not true in a movie. It's a device, and the audience knows it. You see it, right? It's dislocating. I don't like it. So, the reason I said yes to adapting the Cider House Rules, a novel that takes place over 15 years, is that I always saw how to do it and make the movie happen in 18 months. Therefore, no passage of time, but I didn't lose the main things that compelled me to write that story in the first place. I could keep it. 18 months, 15 years. I saw how to do it. Usually I don't. Or the way I see how to do it is unlikable to me. Something's lost. And so I say, no, not interested. In Cider House's case, I said, oh, I see how to do this. You know, I see how to take 15 months and turn it into 15 years and turn it into 18 months.
And a great movie.
This was just the opposite. I saw the screenplay, but in the story of the screenplay itself, there were these elements that I thought, hey, if we see this guy 40 years later, and he's actually taking this trip, I can have it both ways. And I can bring, not to forget them, I can bring Miriam and Dorothy along.
Okay.
And now we should say something else about Miriam and Dorothy without giving too much away. He thinks they're a mother and daughter. Not everyone does. But he takes them at their word that that's who they are. And in some ways they seem more like a mother and daughter because of the way they bitch at each other. They seem more like a mother and daughter than most mother and daughters. They seem very mother and daughter. because of how overly familiar they are with each other and how they know how to push each other's buttons like they've been doing it all their lives. In that way, they're very convincing. But other people, except for Juan Diego, who meet them, say, Jesus, they don't look anything alike. And the mother looks like she's kind of too young to have a daughter that age. And there's all sorts of doubts and suspicions cast on them. Regardless of whether they are or aren't a mother and daughter, I hope you know this about novels. They're not recommendations. The things you read about in a novel, I'm not recommending them to you. Right? In fact, in many cases, I think it would be a terrible idea. Well, this is one of those terrible ideas.
Don't try
whatever
this at home.
Whatever you do, you meet a mother and daughter, okay, make up your mind. You don't sleep with both of them. No, that's not a good thing. Nothing good can come of this. Really. If you're thinking about it, stop. Right?
I'm sure so many of you were. So now,
it's
be warned.
Don't. I mean, I just didn't want someone to think I was putting that out there as a
of course not.
form of recommended behavior, because it's pretty clear to me, although there was one reviewer who seemed to think I was recommending it, which shows you what they know.
You've talked in the past about how you write, how well you know everything about your novel when you're starting, and you know not only the last sentence, but you often know, in fact, the whole last couple of paragraphs, right? You're writing toward that. You have your last sentence. And in this one, and I asked if it's okay to say it, not every collision course comes as a surprise. So is this a book about fate, or what do you want to say about the closing sentence?
Well, I have to be a little careful that to one very truthful extent, all of my novels are about fate.
Yes.
Because they're all fated to me. That is, they are all ending driven. I don't begin writing a novel until I've already written the ending. I don't mean that I need to know merely what happens. I need to know how it sounds. I need to know how I say it happens. I need to know the language, the exact language. It has never changed. And I think that's a part of what I would call the theatrical or the dramatic structure that most of my novels have, or at least I consciously try to give them that structure. And what I mean by dramatic or theatrical is that they are set up. Everything is set up. Everything. I'm not clever enough to know how you foreshadow something if you don't know what's going to happen. I feel that it's enormously easy to foreshadow something if I know what's going to happen. And I like foreshadow, but to be honest with you, I don't know how to fake it. I kind of have to work out what's going to happen before I can do the foreshadow part. So it's necessary for me to know those things. I had an old acting teacher when I was in high school, and he always used to say, you have to know the way your character is going to say the last thing he or she has to say, because you have to know how you sound when you say that, because you don't want to sound that way too soon. You don't want to let that cat out of the bag until you get there. So you have to know what there is. How do you sound when you're saying the last thing you have to say? Well, I'm not saying the reason I get endings first, the reason endings seem to come to me before beginnings do. The reasons I need to backload my stories as much as I do, and I always know more about the ending than I do about the beginnings. Beginnings often change. I find first chapters to be terribly flexible. I have often changed first chapters and exchanged them for chapter 3 or chapter 2. I can move those chapters around. I often change first sentences. You have a lot of flexibility about how something begins. But I don't feel so much at the end. It sounds a certain way. And maybe that comes from being an actor as a kid and having a first love of the theater before I was old enough to read those novels that made me want to be a novelist, that made me say, oh, well, if you wrote novels like that, you could be all the characters. You wouldn't have to just choose one. You could be everybody. But I was older when I read those novels. The theater was a part of my childhood, a part of my growing up it was there first. So maybe it comes from there, but like your question about analyzing where the fear comes from, I don't give a whole lot of scrutiny or theorizing to why the endings come first. It's not a religion. If I ever were writing a novel and I thought of a better ending than the one I had sort of preordained, I wouldn't hesitate to use it. I wouldn't feel that philosophically or religiously or morally my life was destroyed. I wouldn't give a damn about it. If it was a better ending, I'd take it. But I don't really expect that's going to happen after 14 novels. I kind of think that is what my process is, and I just try to take my time. Maybe not 25 years. That's longer than usual. But to be fair, the novels I'm going to write always wait longer than the number of years it will take me to write them once I start. In other words, on an average, maybe they wait 5 to 8 years, that's probably average, before I say, okay, now I know enough about you to begin you. And I will begin, and then, okay, one of the novels took 7 years. This one, from the moment I wrote the first sentence, from the moment I began it, right, began writing the novel, it took only 3 years. But that's misleading to say, because it had already lived as a screenplay for a long, long time, and I only had to write half of it. Half of it was already written. I'd done the childhood and adolescence in Mexico. So I had half a novel to write. No wonder it took only 3 years. But that's unusual. Now, about that last sentence, not every collision course comes as a surprise. I like it. But a very close friend of mine who knows me very well, he kind of ruined it for me. Because when I happened to say, when he asked me what I was doing, what I was working on, I said, oh, I've just begun Avenue of Mysteries as a novel. I've just started writing it as a novel. And he, who knows me very well, said, oh yeah, what's the last sentence? And because he knew I would know it, or I wouldn't have begun. And I said, not every collision course comes as a surprise. And he looked very unimpressed and said, well, that could be the last sentence to almost any of your novels. and he's right. He's right. Because most of them are, in one sense or another, collision courses that by the time you get there are no surprise. Most of them are. So.
I know you've got some audience questions, but before you get to that, I just want to ask you one more thing. Juan Diego becomes a writer, and he talks a lot in the book about writing and all the stuff that goes around with writing. But one of the things that was most interesting about him is he talks about who his masters were, or the people that really taught him, because he was a reader, as all writers. He was a reader first, and the writers that sparked his imagination, which I believe, Mr. Irving, might be the same as the ones that sparked yours, Dickens, Hardy, Hawthorne, and Melville. So you've already mentioned Melville, and I know you've talked about Dickens, but can you just briefly tell us why those are the guys for you? No?
Only hesitating about the briefly part.
Well, I knew that would throw a spanner in the works.
Why does anyone expect me to be brief? I mean, when the hell am I ever brief? It's the briefly thing. Oh, okay, briefly. Am I known for haikus? I don't know. Okay, I'll give it a shot, but briefly, huh? Well,
okay, forget the briefly.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, okay. I write very explicitly, very purposely, explicitly about sex. I always have. And it may surprise some people that I feel the novel that most gave me permission to do that was The Scarlet Letter, where the finger of blame is pointed most assuredly at the people who disapprove of sex or of sexual things, not the people who do it. And it's remarkable to live at this time as we do in the 21st century, and to be reminded that no one, I think, in fiction ever made that point as well as Nathaniel Hawthorne did in The Scarlet Letter, which, remember, was, even when he wrote it, an historical novel. Hawthorne was not writing about his time, he was writing about the time of the Puritans. Mm-hmm. Well, they're still with us, the Puritans. Or their influences that would, if not disapprove of all sex, that they would disapprove of some kinds of sex, or certain sex, or certain sexual differences, etc. The sexual Puritans have not gone away. They may have changed their targets, but they behave in the same way that those horrible people behaved in The Scarlet Letter. So I'm not that crazy about all of Nathaniel Hawthorne's work. I am crazy about all of Dickens's work, all of Hardy's work, all of Melville's work. So in Hawthorne's case, it's The Scarlet Letter in particular that, every couple of years when I pick it up looking for a scene, I just read the whole thing all over again. Because it is such an indictment of the spirit to disapprove sexually. That's what that novel is about. It's bracing, and it doesn't go away. In Melville's case, sure, Moby Dick is the one. If he'd written nothing else, that's good enough. But he did, of course, write other things, and they move me too. I like the way Melville sets things up. he and I think I've always said that the best first chapter in all of literature is Thomas Hardy's The Mayor of Casterbridge. There's no first chapter that'll ever touch it. Well, there's no ending, I think, that'll ever stand up to the ending of Moby Dick, even though you know it's coming. There's something you don't know. There's something you don't see, and when you do see it, it's one of those endings that makes you think, oh God, why didn't I see that coming? Of course, it's been there all along. Mm. And it's the novel that demonstrates, you know, you can't write a good ending if you don't know what's going to happen and pretty much how before you get there. It's a lesson novel in that regard. And Dickens had the ability to make you laugh one minute and cry at the end of the same chapter. He had that emotional ability to be funny and then as suddenly not. He could turn it on and off, repeatedly. So it's that emotional sensitivity that always affects me about him. And of course, why wouldn't I, having described myself earlier as a worst case scenario person, why wouldn't I love Hardy? Because talk about worst case scenarios, you know, he knew that routine. He had that down. But don't forget that classical theater, which predates by several centuries anyone ever writing a novel. Don't forget that Euripides and Sophocles also were, shall we say, they knew their way around worst case scenarios very well. They knew how to make the worst thing possible happen and then make it worse than you even thought. Sophocles wrote 3 plays about Oedipus. One wouldn't do. Right? Because when you inadvertently kill your father and unwittingly have children with your mother, one play can't handle all the shit that's going to happen. It just can't deal with it. There's got to be 3. Right? So that was a lesson. That's like, whoa, okay. And Shakespeare knew his way around worst case scenarios too. He was really good at worst case scenarios. So I had my models before there were novels, but it's evident that Hardy especially, and Dickens were aware of the Greeks, and Shakespeare very aware.
So you've got some questions from the audience. These are questions that you gave John earlier. Now he's going to answer a few of them for us. Briefly. It's his thing. Promising start.
You know, there was one of these, I read the wrong side of it first. And I just have to share this with you because I thought this was the question, or I thought it was in lieu of a question, because I just picked up the paper and I read the wrong side first, okay? It's an innocent mistake, I'm serious, it's totally innocent. And so I picked up what I thought was the question, and it said, "Pick me." I thought, really? Come on. Well, of course, that's not what the person meant. The question is on the other side. We'll get to that one. Here's an unrelated question. Juan Diego states that women keep fiction alive. Do you believe this? If so, why? Well, Juan Diego also says he doesn't really know why, he just knows it's true. And I don't really like speculation a whole lot more than Juan Diego does. I don't know why, but I know it's true. I travel a lot. I hear a lot from my readers. Yes, there are men, grown men, not just college students, but there are grown men who read literary fiction. I've met you, I know you exist. I'm not slating you or saying that I don't believe you really are real. But I hope you can handle this. You're outnumbered. And I'm not the only writer who says this. Ian McEwan said it very well, that no one can say that the novel is dead as long as there are women, because women are the principal readers of novels. You know, they always have been. They always have been. Women were among some of the very first writers of novels. And many of those very first novels were written not just by women. The Bronte sisters, for example, Jane Austen, those novels were largely perceived as for women, right? Well, we've moved on, but I don't know what the answer is, but up to a certain age, through the age of, say, university age, I see an equal number of young men and young women reading good novels. In airports, you know, in coffee houses. I look at what people are reading, right? I look at what if someone has a book, I check it out. I'm curious. And so up to a certain age, I think men and women have a pretty equal interest in reading fiction. When I speak at universities, university audiences, those audiences are pretty equally divided between men and women. But above a certain age, when you're no longer in school, it all changes. Now, why is it that women would live more in their imaginations or keep their interest in the imagination or in imaginative writing alive longer than most men do? I can't tell you, but it's observable. It's observable. To the degree that when I see a grown man reading a literary novel on an airplane, I have to restrain myself from hugging him or saying, "Sir, you realize you're an endangered species, God bless you." I have to, hold myself back. I mean, it's unusual. It's unusual. Guys are reading nonfiction, or if they are reading fiction, they're reading shit. I don't know why it is, but it's 9 times out of 10 it's true. No speculation. And sometimes every once in a while you're in an airport, you're waiting for a bag at the carousel. There's a guy circling the carousel, and he recognizes you, and you get your hopes up. He's going to come and say, "You're my favorite writer." No, no, it's not what it's about. The guy comes up and says, Are you John Irving?" "Yes." I say a little tentatively. He said, "You're my mother's favorite writer." "You're my wife's favorite writer. You're my daughter's favorite writer." Thanks a lot. Okay, fine. That's what happens. I can't tell you, but okay, that's what it is.
I agree with your observation.
It's a good question, Matt, but I can't help you beyond that. It's an easy one. The shortest length of time I ever took to complete a book. Aha. Well, that would be this one. If you talk about from the moment I began writing it as a novel to the moment I finished it, I began on Christmas Eve 2011. I finished it in early December of 2014. That's a record for me. But you got to add 25 years. All those years it was a movie first. So that's really not fair. The shortest time I ever spent writing a novel that didn't come to me already half written, because it was a screenplay for many years before I began, would have been my shortest novel, The Fourth Hand. And it took me the least amount of time to write because it's the shortest. I have heard writers say that writing shorter novels is harder than writing long ones. Bullshit. No. Not in my experience. Here's an interesting one. Actually, three. I took this one and sort of revised it a little because there were three questions that were almost exactly the same. That happens in these events, but usually not with this question. Usually this is a one-only question, but three of you asked this question in a variety of ways. It goes like this: your books have such diverse characters and tell such diverse stories. Do you feel responsible for including marginalized people in your work? Why do you? Meaning old white guys like you. One of you said it that way. That's what you mean. So why, do I feel some responsibility as a sort of mainstream person, mainstream racially, mainstream age-wise, mainstream gender-wise, mainstream in all the ways? Why then do I seem drawn to or have written about so many people who are either living on the fringe or treated as if they were one minority or another? One of the questions of this kind singled out sexual minorities and sexual differences in particular. Well, I think responsible is not what I feel. Certainly there is a sense of social responsibility, a sense of the politics of social responsibility in at least 6 of the 14 novels, you could say 8. I think right around half of them are novels that I would call guided by a kind of social morality, a political point of view, even a polemical point of view in the case of Cider House and Owen Meany, but around half, yeah. Well, I think this is all connected with, it fits into the worst case scenario scheme. I do, in the characters I want you to sympathize with. I don't make their situation easy. I purposely look for ways to make to put them in a difficult spot, a spot that I hope will provoke your empathy, make you feel sympathetic toward them, of course. And once you feel that way, then you should start worrying about them, because something's probably going to happen to them. And so I think it's all a part of that instinct of being or feeling a kind of empathetic fear for people who are vulnerable to other people's hatred, vulnerable to other people's intolerance, vulnerable to a kind of general social neglect, or just the circumstances into which they were born, right? It's because if you don't if you don't feel some sympathy for a character's vulnerability in a story, it's not going to matter to you what I or anybody else does to them. You won't care. But it does matter to me that you care. And you're not going to care if I hurt someone that you don't have an emotional or psychological investment in. That's also a theatrical rule, right? If you want to move the audience has got to like somebody for some reason. They've got to feel for someone for some reason. And I think those things are all connected. Too many of this question to even have counted. I just kept one of these, but there's a bunch of ways everybody asks it. What do I think is my best book? Well, I don't. I honestly don't. I know authors have said this so often it becomes, it sounds like a cliche, therefore it is one, that we say, oh, they're like my children, I can't pick between them. Or that's what authors routinely say. I've said it myself. Well, I do have an answer for that question, without singling out any one book. And in my case, there's a very good reason for the reason I answer that question in this way. For the writing of my first 4 books, I had a full-time job. I was a wrestling coach, and I was an English teacher, and I imagined I always would be. I imagined that that's how I was going to support myself for the rest of my working life. And whatever time I had left over, which was not enough, I would write. Okay? That's what I imagined, that's what I thought. And for the writing of the first 4 novels, The World According to Garp being the 4th, I thought that's how it was going to be. I never expected to make a living at the only thing I really loved doing and wanted to do, I kept telling myself, and would do 8 or 9 hours a day, 7 days a week, if I just could afford to. And I never imagined I would be able to afford to. With the publication of The World According to Garp, I could afford to. And I was deeply disappointed in myself that I couldn't immediately begin. In other words, I suddenly had all the time to be a writer and said that's all I ever wanted to be. And I couldn't do it. For the writing of The Hotel New Hampshire, my 5th novel, I still couldn't concentrate for more than 3 or 4 hours at a time. I found it really hard to work 7 days a week, and I was really down on myself. I got what I never expected, to be self-supporting at the only thing I truly loved and believed I could love until I died. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't deliver. I was being a little hard on myself. It took me the writing of 1 book to learn how to just extend my concentration span. And by the time I got to novel number 6, The Cider House Rules, I was doing it. I was working 7, 8 hours a day, no problem. In fact, I used to have to set an alarm clock because if the clock didn't go off, I wouldn't go to the gym, or I'd miss wrestling practice or something. And you know, I could do it 7, 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I've been able to do it ever since. And so I say, you know, and this is the tailor speaking about the suits of clothes. I say that every novel of mine, beginning with The Cider House Rules, beginning with number 6, through this one, Avenue of Mysteries, number 14, everything between Cider House and Avenue of Mysteries is simply better made, better constructed, better built, more purposely built than everything I wrote before it. Because ask anybody to do something as well as they can, if you do it every day, all day, you do it better than if you only get 2 hours or 3 hours a day and you're only working 4 days a week. Ask a doctor what kind of a practice he'd have in medicine if he could only see patients on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Ask a lawyer to be a lawyer if he only gets to work 2 days a week. Doesn't work. You know, you better be better if you've got 7 days a week to do it, right? There's no excuse not to be. So I see the difference. Architecturally, in terms of intentionality, I see the difference. There's no reason you should, but I do. No, there's no reason you should. This one is easy, and I don't mean to sound flippant in the way I answer it. I'm not being flippant. It's a thoughtful question. It has been said that each of your stories has a theme, i.e. abortion, incest. I guess I can't list them all. Anyway, is there any subject you feel you cannot or maybe should not address? No. No, there isn't. But I think after 14 novels, I've demonstrated that I have my limitations, largely because of the things that keep recurring. And whether or not I will ever address something totally new grows more unlikely with each passing book because of the recurrence of those things that obsess me. But no, I don't feel there is a subject I couldn't or shouldn't address. I don't know, though, that if it's fair to expect that at age 73, conscious of wanting my novels to each one be a little shorter than the last. I said a little shorter than the last. I don't know that it's realistic or very realistic to imagine that something utterly new is going to overtake me. These questions are very related, these two. One is, where did Owen Meany come from? Did he come from anyone real? And the other is, I've read your books over and over, and I am drawn and never want to be parted from your characters. They seem so real. My question is, are they real? Please say yes.
Well,
Alas, alas, no. In almost every case, they're not. And certainly in almost every major case, they're not. But listen carefully. I may not be like most of you in this respect. When I see, as so many movies today tell us they are, based on a true story, that does not compel me to see it. My feeling about true stories is I could do better, because true stories aren't good enough. Or, by my standards, they're not bad enough. They're not as bad as they could have been. That's what I usually mean by that. In other words, the problem with true stories is you're stuck with what happened. You know, now, many filmmakers don't feel stuck. They take the true story and then they change it because they're not satisfied with it. I do feel that if you're going to base something on a true story, you have to be true to it. I am actually working on such a film, have been for many years. I don't think I'll ever get it made. But it's about a real person. I don't know that it'll ever happen.
can you say who the person is?
No, it will be here forever. It's not a good idea. But my point is this. Dickens made this point in David Copperfield. Copperfield, as he grows up, is terribly disappointed to discover that real life is sloppier. That's the word he uses. Sloppier than he expected to find it. Well, whatever gave poor David Copperfield the idea that real life isn't or wouldn't be sloppy? You know what? Good books. Good books gave him that idea. Even good children's books. So real life lets Copperfield down. Well, I find it lets me down too. It's just not good enough. Or in my own case, will I use things that have happened to me? All the time. But most things that happen to me are so boring, they're not worth using, right? And nothing that's happened to me is so sacred to me, because it's real, that I don't feel given license to change it, to make it much worse than it was, right? To make it interesting. But true stories, you're stuck with the imperfect world. Why, you think Hamlet's a true story? Come on. No, it's not. It's a nightmare. Hamlet is a nightmare. It's not a true story. It's an awful story, but it's not a true story. So I don't have a lot of stock in what's real. We're going to end with this one, though. I'm going to come back. I know, you thought I forgot you. You who said, where did Owen Meany come from? Well, Owen Meany did come from somewhere, but this almost makes my point, is that he comes from someone I completely forgot. He comes from someone I did know, but I didn't even know I knew him. Now, here's what happened, okay? As briefly, hang on, Tina, we're not going to be here all night. As briefly as possible, here's what happened. I go home to see my parents in New Hampshire one Christmas. I already have, a family. I go home to see my parents for Christmas, as people do, right? And some of the people that I've been in school with, that I went to school with in this little New Hampshire town, well, they're home seeing their parents too. And of course, my mother would be the first to say, well, Bobby's here, Priscilla's home. And I'm thinking, oh, God. Not necessarily wanting to see these people, not necessarily still close to them or ever close to them. But yes, I knew them. And so inevitably, going home for Christmas means, well, there's an evening when you go out with all of your schoolmates or people you grew up with, friends or not, who happen to be in town doing the same thing you are. Does this sound familiar? Okay. At this point in my life, I'm thinking about a story. And I've been thinking about it for some time, as is my wont. For many years, I've been thinking about this. And it doesn't even have a Vietnam connection. Not yet. It doesn't. Right? I'm thinking about a voice. No, it's not the voice you're thinking of. Not Owen's voice. Not that voice. I'm thinking about the voice of the person who's telling that story. The person who, from the opening of the novel, is remembering a best friend he's lost. I'm thinking about that old subject that Tina and I talked about early this evening. What is it that happens to you at a formative time in your life that you will never get over? And I always thought, if you lose a friend who was a childhood friend, and you're still young when you lose him or her, you never get over it. You never get over it. That loss counts for more because you're still young and it goes back to your childhood, right? And I do feel that way about people I lost in Vietnam, friends of mine who went and didn't come back. Also, friends of mine who really ripped their lives in pieces not to go. Both things, right? Both things. But I don't know where to begin. I don't have a clue. So we're all sitting around, those of us who know each other variously or not, and somebody starts talking about everybody we knew who died in Vietnam or radically ruined their life not to go there. Both. And people start naming names. Most of the names I know, okay? Most of the names, oh yeah, okay. No surprises, right? And then somebody mentions a kid that I just said, nah, maybe you guys knew him, but I don't know that kid. Oh yeah, you knew that kid. Everybody knew that kid. I said, no, not me. I didn't. You know, maybe I was doing something else. I never met him. Oh, you did. Everybody remembers him. No, I said, I have no idea who you're talking about. I still can't, to this day, I don't know the name, the real name, right? And they said, oh, he was killed in Vietnam. You know, his name's on the wall. He was killed in Vietnam. And then someone said, but he left town. You know, he was only like 7 or 8 when he left town. And I said, oh, that's why I don't remember him. Okay, he left town when he was 7 or 8. What do you expect? You know, I don't remember somebody who was 7 or 8, you know, if that's the last time I saw him. Well, but you do remember him. I remember you used to pick him up by his ankles and shake him so that all his money fell out on his face. And he would get so mad, and he was so vulgar. He said such horrible things, and he had a really horrible voice. And I did remember this kid. You know, I suddenly had a picture because we were all 7 or 8, but this kid, he was no bigger than a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old, so everyone was always picking him up, which really pissed him off because he was a tough kid who came from sort of difficult circumstances, and he was so vulgar. We never heard anyone talk like this. I mean, he said things that we didn't even know what they meant. I mean, he mentioned body parts we didn't know existed. Maybe they didn't. I mean, he was really vile in his language. And that was shocking because we never heard anyone talk like that. Except this guy, if you picked him up and tickled him or, you know, grabbed him by his ears or something. And he was tempting to do that because he was our age, but he was half our size. He was this little guy. He just, something was wrong, I don't know. And his voice was weird. And so I thought, that kid, I remember that kid. I still can't remember his name. And everyone kind of took a big sigh, and I said the stupidest thing I've ever said in my life. I said to my collected friends, I said, that kid died in Vietnam? How could he have gone to Vietnam? He was too small. That's what I said. And one of my actual good friends among this gathering of people, and a guy who'd actually been in Vietnam, said, Irving, he probably grew. But here's my point about the imagination and what's real and what isn't real. Here's my point. I went home that night, and that's when I began a prayer for Owen Meany, because the note I wrote and put on my bedside table said the following thing. Yeah, comma, yeah, but what if he didn't grow? And in the morning, I was on my way. I am doomed to remember a boy with a wrecked voice. On the morning I was off, I said, yeah, but what if he didn't grow? So that's the closest to somebody real. But you see, I can't even remember his name. Now, I wouldn't recognize him if I saw him. So not that real. But what happened to him was real. And I will always see him as that kid who was at the time, kids grow at different times in their lives, right? I've had 3 children. They don't all have their growth spurts, at the exact same age. They don't. So this poor kid left New Hampshire and had the misfortune of growing like anybody else.
I think that's
We're
the
good.
end of the questions. Thank you very much, audience, for the questions. I'd like to thank...
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. John Irving.